I think it's also become a signal that this book is going to be less of a quick read, less of a, you know, sort of market thriller or common, and it's going to be more literary. And if you look at the books that are coming out in trade paperback, I think that's clear. And it'll be interesting to me to see how the Beekeeper, and if they take the other Mary Russell books into that format, how that will work.
I haven't heard yet whether, I think they're waiting to see how this does.
Sure. Well, it's too soon to
It's
tell.
an experiment to see, because you do reach a slightly different kind of audience with trade paperback, simply because it's posted in a different place in the store.
And they cost more.
And they cost more.
And there's that. But additionally, Beekeepers, your books have been out in mass market for a long time. And you don't print as many because they're priced more expensively. You don't need to print as many copies of a trade paperback to make a profit as you do of a small one. And so if you're going to reissue something that has already had a large life, that's an attractive format too, because you don't invest.
I noticed they are doing a number of mystery writers. The early Phyllis James, P.D. James's early ones are now out in trade
Elmore
paper,
Leonard and Larry Block. I mean, there have been experiments moving authors back and forth in. What is an advantage to them, though, I think, is that generally you do get more attractive covers, even if it's the wrong insect. In general, it's a prettier book.
Especially with a thicker book. You know, because sometimes when you have a 400 or 500 page paperback, it's very tough to read, but the trades are nicer to read.
I think so.
They're like reading a hardback without the weight of the cover.
Yep. And if you drop it in the bathtub, you don't have to cry quite as hard as
and if you fall asleep with it over your head, you don't break your nose. So that's also
there's that
distinct advantage.
So Mary Russell, 15, and she is basically Holmes is mentoring her in The Beekeeper's Apprentice.
In the beginning, yeah.
And there's, if I remember, there's a long sequence in Wales. They go to Wales.
It's a very interesting structure of a book, and in fact, looking at a first draft of this one, you'd see why it had been turned down by a number of publishers, because it's very episodic.
Right.
When I rewrote it along the way, each time I managed to get things tied together a bit more, so that it makes more of a single novel. But it's the story of a young woman who learns how to do this job of being a consulting detective. And the only way you can tell that story is to show from, you know, sort of baby cases on to bigger cases on to really large cases. And so in fact, the whole Wales part of it, which becomes central to the book and the solution of the book, was in the rewrite. It wasn't in the first draft at all. Yeah.
Well, Wales is not often, you know, a setting in crime fiction, and it's such an interesting country that I'm always...
It's a very interesting country.
You bet. I'm always interested in following, you know, books where I can offer that to people, because people often ask for them. So at the end of the book, she and Holmes have been through this kind of process, and now she's ready to go to Oxford. She wants to continue her studies. And so in A Monstrous Regiment of Women, right?
Right.
She's moving off to university. And that's where the next book, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And then we go on to A Letter of Mary, and she's married to Holmes by then, right?
Monstrous Regiment is the process of her deciding whether she wants to join up with this man for the rest of her life or to be an independent woman.
Right.
It's the process of deciding, you know, what her own identity is going to be. And then in Letter of Mary, indeed, she has made the decision.
And then you go on, The Moor is in fact the one that's probably the closest to a pastiche, and that, you know, it's the Hound of the Baskervilles echoing along in the book. I love the book. I was so cold all the way through it. You always had these poor wretched people out on this ghastly moor, you know, covered in mud and squelching in their wellies and all the rest of it. And I kept thinking, you know, I want to take a hot bath while I was reading your book.
Yes.
And I love it, and you do some very interesting things. That's the one, I think, where readers really will enjoy it a little extra if they have read Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yeah, although I play with the story in the sense that the hound that appears in The Moor is not the same hound.
No.
It's the same moor. But,
and it's the same, well, it's some Baskervilles, too.
Yes, there's a Baskerville in the woodwork. But, yeah, it's... I think there's a lot going on in there that you would miss if you hadn't read Hound of the Baskervilles, but
Well, it's an extra enjoyment. I mean, the book stands wonderfully well on its own, but if you happen to have read the other thing, I think it kind of revs it up. And then you do have this sort of marvelous old, I mean, the religious thing sort of stays in there because you've got this marvelous old clergyman where they go, when they go there, and they're forced to stay in the vicarage and endure the real horrors of belonging to the Church of England, right?
Sabine Baring Gold, yes,
Yeah.
yes, my great hero.
The housing situation, I've decided that maybe there were, it was an unbelievable hardship. No wonder they were so pious. They had to find comfort somewhere.
And he was a squire. I mean, the house was extremely comfortable by vicarage standards.
But anyway, having survived all that, suddenly you wrote, for number 5, you wrote a book called Old Jerusalem, and you went back in time to an episode in Holmes and Mary's life that you hadn't dealt with.
I think it's just one chapter in The Beekeeper's Apprentice where the two of them need to get out of England to catch their breath and think about what's going on. And I send them off to Palestine because Mary's Jewish and she doesn't know quite what else to do, and so she chooses to go there rather than any of the other places that are offered them. And you don't really find out in The Beekeeper's Apprentice what they do there. They just talk about, she talks about how she enjoyed it and how it taught her a lot, and they met these 2 Bedouin Arabs, and then they go back to England and get on with the case. But of course the reason that chapter's in there is because I wanted to write a book set in Palestine in 1919.
So you seeded the field, so to speak.
Yeah. And in fact, I not only seeded the field, I seeded the next field on, because there is mention in The Beekeeper's Apprentice that the accents are not quite those of the Bedouin. And indeed, when you get to the current book, Justice Hall, you'll find that the 2 Bedouin Arabs that they've trudged around in the freezing cold again, although it's dry cold rather than wet cold, that the 2 Bedouin who have led them about the countryside in Palestine in O Jerusalem then show up in tweeds and bowler hats in England with indeed English accents.
Absolutely.
So.
I think, I know that you are really fond, like I, of the character of, my mind's going, Lawrence of Arabia. And you've actually kind of done the reverse thing here. I love that. You've sent these 2 English gentlemen. They've lived in Palestine, Ali and Mohammed, right? The brothers.
Mahmoud, yeah.
Mahmoud,
yeah.
okay, I always get his
Well,
name.
it's the same name, but
Is
yeah.
it? Okay, and is it pronounced Hazar? H-A-Z-R?
Yes, probably Hauser, yeah.
Okay, Hazar, whatever. Well, anyway, all the way through O Jerusalem, are these 2 Bedouin brothers conducting Mary, and she has a tough time winning recognition from them because, it's not like that they really valued women. I mean, the Al-Qaeda thing is...
They didn't have much opportunity to meet interesting women there, no.
Well, women certainly Mary was a shock for them. and all the way through the book, there's a lot of negotiation between Mary and the 2 brothers, et cetera, et cetera.
But once she tries to kill them, they get along fine.
Yeah, well, she had to prove she was a tough broad, right, for get any respect.
If you don't speak their language, that's...
Well, you had a lot of fun with O Jerusalem. There's a lot of good stuff going on.
Yeah.
So now, all of a sudden, here comes Justice Hall, and Holmes and Mary, they're in darkest, Bedfordshire?
I think so.
I think that's where we are, in Middle England, anyway.
Yeah.
And this sort of classic Palladian, gorgeous English country home with the wing, well, it's not really the E shape, but anyway, main block, side wings, the whole 9 yards. And lo, these 2 Bedouin brothers appear, and it turns out that they really were English gentlemen who went and posed undercover for British intelligence as these agents, and I'm going, oh, come on, Laurie, I know you've gotten drunk on Lawrence of Arabia. I didn't think you were ever going to convince me, but there's this sort of, you have an ability to sort of mesmerize your reader, so even if they go kicking and screaming into your story, you kind of make it plausible.